2 of our Duck Run watercolour painting project. This is a part where we're going to learn to paint it. We're going to be painting it in layers. So that will mean that you're going to need to let one layer dry before you can paint the next one. For example, we're going to be starting with this yellow and then we're going to be painting with the blue. If you're doing a picture the size of mine, what you'll notice if you've bought your kit from Artshed, that you've got 2 little pots with some powder in, and that's called Brusho. You can buy this online if you don't have it. And what it is it's just powder that you can mix with water, and it just means that you can make a lot more of one colour, because it can be quite difficult to get that much colour using just the tablets. So you're going to need your watercolour paint and some paint brushes. I've demonstrated quite a lot with a flat brush, so if you have one of those, that will be really useful. You'll also need a water pot and maybe some tissue. So let's get started. To get started, I've mixed up some watery yellow paint. You can mix this up with normal watercolour, or I've used something called Brusho, which is like a powder. You put a tiny bit in, add some water, and you want to test it out on a piece of paper first to make sure it's the right colour. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start by painting where my sun is coming up. I'm going to put that down. Now it doesn't matter if you paint over the bushes and the trees, because later on they're going to have some colour on anyway. I'm not going to go right up, and I'm going to leave some white streaks. You can go a bit over this hill as well. So I've left some white streaks there. You can probably see I'm using a flat brush. And this is going to help me when I'm going to paint the reflection of that now in my water. So if you have a look how high your sky is, what you want to do is paint roughly the same height of reflections in your water. So nearer the edge, I can keep it all smooth without leaving white gaps. So again, don't worry about going over trees. But as I move down towards the middle of the pond, I'm going to use the edge of my flat brush, and can you see that I'm going to leave quite a lot of white bits. Try to keep them quite flat, otherwise you'll end up with a pond that's very wavy, unless you want a wavy pond. So really important that you leave those white bits, and then as you get nearer, just do little bits and then stop and don't go any further. Okay, you could take some onto the island as well if you like. Even onto the house, there's going to be bits of yellow reflected. Now try not to paint over your ducks, because we do want to keep our ducks white. So I'm happy with that. I think that's enough yellow. And while that's drying, I can start putting the blue on the pond. So now you can see I've done the same. I've mixed up some lovely light blue colour and I've tested it on another piece of paper to make sure I'm happy with the colour I'm using. So I'm going to start just at the bottom here. And I've got my flat brush again. going to be trying be quite neat around my ducks. So you're going to paint everything that would be the water in this bit. And this bit here, you don't need to worry about any reflections. You can just paint it all smooth and one colour. If you've got any big puddles, you can move them around, but don't worry too much. You'll find that your paper starts to go, you can see mine going a little bit bobbly. That's quite normal. This paper I'm using is quite thin, so it will bobble. If you use very expensive, really thick watercolour paper, you'll find it doesn't bobble quite so much. So I've done this bottom bit of the pond, and now I'm going to move up above my fence. And now I'm going to think about leaving white bits again, because I want there to start to be some little ripples. So as I go above my fence, I'm going to do a little bit what I did with use the edge of my flat brush. Can you see I'm starting to leave some ripples, or just leave some white bits. Try and keep them, again, if you want a smooth, calm surface to your water, keep your marks quite flat. If they go all over the place, up and down like this, you'll find that you've got a storm going on top of your pond, which, you know, if that's what you'd like. So once I get to the yellow up here, I'm going to start bringing some of my blue up into the yellow. Now you don't want your yellow to be really wet, but if it starts to mix a little bit, it really doesn't matter if it goes green, because obviously ponds are often very green. So as you go further away, bring less and less blue, and then we'll put the blue into the sky. So again, keep it flat, thin lines using the edge of your brush. And they get smaller and smaller. As they go away. You can probably already see that the surface of the water is starting to look a bit sparkly. See, it's not that difficult really. If you've not done this before, don't worry, because you'll do have as many goes as you like. So I'm happy with that bit. I'm just going to do this bit over here. So I've just topped up on my blue because I was running out. And now I'm going to paint the sky, and I'm going to go from the top of the sky towards my yellow. Try not to hit my yellow or mix with my yellow, because I don't really want green in my sky. Now this time I don't really want blue in my trees either, so I'm going to go round. And again, you can leave white bits because there could be little bits of cloud. I might just bring patches of my sky down into the yellow. Just really kind of painting into the white bits and not really on the yellow. So I'm happy with that. And we now need to let all that dry completely before we do the next bit. So this is nice and dry now, and I'm going to go back to my yellow, and this time I've got a smaller paintbrush. This is a round paintbrush. This is a number 6, but any smallish round paintbrush will do. And I'm going to put in some more areas that I want to be yellow. So I'm going to start with the duck's beaks. Later on, what I'm going to do is let this yellow dry, and I'm going to put some orange on top. I'm also going to do their feet. Now, you could have done this at the beginning, but the problem would have been is that if you put wet watercolour next to wet watercolour, they mix. That's why I waited for the blue to be dry before I put the yellow on, because I didn't really want the yellow and the blue to mix. So that's an important thing about watercolour. If you put 2 wet colours next to each other, they'll start mixing. So I'm also going to put some flicks of yellow, because I'm going to be having grass on my path, and they're just flicks, and this time it can go over the blue, and you'll notice that they start to turn green. Later on I'm going to be putting some green on, so this is kind of underneath it all. And then I'm going to do the same down here. It's best to flick up rather than going down, because you want the point. Okay. I also might put a little bit more yellow patches on my island. And I'll be painting on top of that again later on. So I'm going to go back to my path and back to my blue, because I could paint my path just plain grey, but actually I'd quite like there to be some sort of puddles in there that my ducks are running through. So I've got my blue already. I'm just going to use the same blue, because anything that's water will be reflecting the sky. I've gone back to my flat paintbrush that I used for the sky. Now this bit, you do have to be a little bit careful that you don't touch your, can you see? Just leave some white, don't touch your duck's feet, because I realise they are still wet. So just leave, just like we did in the sky, you can put some puddles there and leave some white bits. So try not to touch, can you see? I'm trying not to touch my duck's feet, because if I do, feet will go green. I don't really want green feet. So the white bits around their feet will end up looking a bit like splashes. So I'm happy with that. So again, using the edge of my brush. See, you can see that that's just there. A bit of my yellow came out onto my puddle, but that's okay. I'd rather it that way than a bit of puddle go onto the foot. Okay, so there you go. I've got some splashy puddles. I'm going to let that bit dry, and then we can get out the watercolour paints and start filling the rest of our picture with colour. So some of these bits are still a little bit wet, but that's okay for the time being. You can probably see that some of these bits have kind of blurred into the blue because the blue wasn't completely dry, but again, I'm not worried about that because I'm going to be putting some dark green on later on. So I'm going to now work on my light greens. Often with watercolour, it's best to go from light colours to dark colours. So I'm going to start with the bushes back here, some of these bushes, and maybe a few flicks in my grass. It's best to wet, with some water, wet the paints that you want to use. And that way they're going to be a little bit easier. So maybe put a little bit of water on. So I'm going to be using light green. So I'm going to make a little puddle in my light green there. And maybe my bit of puddle in that one. So it's just so that it's ready to use. I wouldn't normally do this on top of my picture, but in case I splash on it, but just so you can see my dark one there, I'm going to get that ready as well. So to hand, I've got my small brush that I did my flicks with, and I've got one that's a little bit bigger. So they're both round brushes. So I'm going to use my bigger one because I'm going to fill my bushes in with light green. So, and I'm just going to leave yellow patches as well. I'm going to do it quite scruffy. Might leave bits of yellow, particularly on the top where maybe the sky is kind of reflecting off the top of the bushes. Just kind of do it in patches, little blobs of paint. And now, every time you put colour in this area, what you're going to do is you're going to reflect it in the water in little strokes. If you remember how we did it before. Now this time I've got a round brush, so I'm just going to be using the tip. And with the same colour that I've used put on my bushes, I'm going to put some little reflections of that colour in the water in little flicks. Oh, that was quite dark, so I'll make that, there we go. Wherever you see the bushes, they're going to be reflecting in the water. Just in patches. So I'm going to move to my bushes on my island. And then I reckon there's going to be some grass on here, so I'm just going to scrub some, quite sort of roughly scrub. When I say scrub, I don't mean really scrub, I just kind of, you don't want to go like this over and over and over your paper, because what you'll find is you wear the paper away and it starts coming up in bits. You don't really want that. So I'm going to move my paper up. I'm going to go back to this bit here and back to my little flicky brush that I used earlier. And then I'm going to start with my light green, building up my grass. So I've put my light green in my picture, And I'm going to go to my next colour green. I've got a middle green here and I've got a darker green here. I might put some of those in as well. Might sort of do it at the same time. So I'm going to get my bigger brush again, my bigger round brush that I was using. Make sure I've got some water in there. The green I put on earlier is still wet, so don't worry about that because it's fine if this now starts to. And what you want to do is kind of put it in like dots. And what you'll find is it kind of mixes itself. You don't need to mix it. Yeah, just put it in dabs. Oh, wrong colour. There we go. You see, I'm kind of dotting it on. I'm not really painting it on. I'm kind of just dotting it. And let it move around because the paint underneath is wet already. Now I've got a bit dark in there, but that's okay. I don't mind that. Now, if you remember, we put that colour in, so we need to put a little bit of it into our pond. Because it's a bit darker, go a little bit more, just be a little bit more careful so you don't, just some little flicks. Okay, so I'm gonna put this dark green in here as well. Maybe a little bit onto my, dot it on into my island. And because it's a darker green, I might stick that under. There's going to be shadow under there. And now I'm going to go back to my grass. And I'm going to keep my big brush this time, I think, and go for the darker one, because you can still flick with the end of it. And there we go, make some slightly different marks now. Now, before I go to my dark green, I'm going to just fill in this bit of my path, and I think I'm going to use grey, just a light grey colour. So just going to put a little bit in there. So now I can move on to the darker greens. Now I don't want to go too dark, so be quite careful. I would always test your colours on a separate piece of paper before you put them on. I would only put on the bottom of the bushes. That is where, and let it, can you see it moves on its own. I want to keep the tops of my bushes quite light, because that's where the sun is catching. The bottoms will be a little bit darker. So I'm actually only really just putting a little line of this on the bottom of each bush. And then it will just travel up itself. Don't forget to put a little bit in the water, so it's going to be right near the wall. Don't worry if you get some on the wall. Try and leave yellow bits. I'm going to go back to my grass. Now there's a little bit there I don't really like. So what you can do is get a little bit of tissue and just dab, hold it down, and it will soak up most of the colour. There you go, so you can see it's not so. When I put the orange on the foot, I don't have to worry about that so much. So there are things you can do if you make some mistakes. It can be a bit more difficult with watercolour than if you're doing acrylic painting or... Watercolour has a mind of its own, and sometimes it goes running off in directions that you didn't want it to. That's why I think some people prefer different types of painting. So I think that's most of my greens done. So I'm going to get to my trees, I think. Now you might be wondering why I didn't put green in my trees. It's because I wanted them to be purple and blue. So I've got some purples and bluey colours here, and actually I'm going to put some of those in my trees just because it's more interesting than just doing them brown and green. So I'm going to use this purple and see what I think of that when I put it on. Bring this down towards me a bit. There we go. See, that's not really dark enough. So. Also going to do my wall, I think, with this colour, this purple. So this time, don't forget that we're reflecting everything we've done here, we're reflecting in the water. So I'm going to reflect all these trees with a few flicks of purple, just dotted, not too dark. So I'm going to test this out first. Just dotted, so you can see that tree there. I'm just going to put just a few dots, just like that. Just kind of wiggling down through the water. So I'm happy with those reflections. I'm not going to bother about these ones here. I'm just going to keep it to that area. So I'm going to move on to these trees. These are, I wanted these to be blossom because I love blossom. What I'm going to do here is a slightly different technique, and it's going to be called wet on wet. So what I'm going to do is actually wet these trees with just plain clean water. So I'm just painting them with water. And you'll see what this does in a minute. I've got quite a big round paintbrush here. Now with my colours, there's some pinks here, and what I'm going to do is wet those. So I've got two different ones there. And once I've got a puddle, I'm just going to drop them in. Can you see that they just explode? So I quite like what's happened there. That will dry a little bit paler, it's quite dark. So what I might do is put a little bit of pink. I'm kind of going to imagine that that is dropping some of its petals onto my island here. So I'm going to put a little bit of pink there on the floor underneath the trees. So now I've got to think about what I'm going to do with these trees. I might just put a little bit of foliage of the leaves just poking at the top, and I might use quite a dark sort of blue colour for that. So let's have a look. This is quite blue. I might mix a tiny bit of green into it. There we go. So I've got my big brush. I'm just going to put some blobs just so it kind of looks like there's some leaves just at the bottom there. Just blobbing, a bit like we did with the bushes. Little bits. I'm not going to reflect that into the water because that's such a dark colour that I don't want to go wrong and end up putting dark colours, because I'm quite happy with my water already, so I think I'm just going to leave it like that. So I'm going to just go to this, back to this area here with some of that colour underneath my house. It's going to be shadow because the sun can't get to it, so I'm going to use a little bit of that dark colour. I'm just going to put it under my house and maybe at the bottom of those bushes there. So all I've got left to do now is just paint all the different colours if you want. I've put some clothes on my little running vests on my ducks, and I'm going to paint my house. So you can obviously do what you like with those different colours. So I think I've finished now with the painting. I'm really happy with that. And any other little bits, I'm going to use my Sharpie pen. I'm going to fill those bits in here. I think I need to colour in his glasses there. I might put a few sort of little marks in the grass, which I can show you how to do later on when this is dried. So my painting is nice and dry now, and I just finished it off with a Sharpie pen. I just filled in this section here just because I wanted that to be dark. I put a few marks in the grass just sort of to make it look like there are tufts of grass there, a few there, and filled in his glasses, and I'm happy with that now. So this is the exciting bit where I get to peel off the tape around the edge. So here we have it, our Duck Run watercolour project all finished. I hope you've enjoyed doing yours at home, and I'd love to see what they look like. So please share them with us on Artshed's Facebook page. If you enjoyed doing this, check out our other projects. We'll have more and more over the coming weeks and months. If you particularly like ducks, we have our puddle duck canvas painting project. This is in acrylics, so slightly different to watercolour, but I'm sure you'll enjoy that just as much.